and welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo.
And I'm Miss Joan Marie Mosi.
We have a great show lined up for you this evening. Our guests, Stephen Fredericks and Rosalee Isley. I'm sorry. Pardon me. Rosalee Isley, and you see her name on the screen right behind us, and that's one of her artworks. She's an artist, a fine artist, and Stephen and Rosalee are working on a project relating to activist art, and we're going to talk about activism in art. And
they're from the New York Society of Etchers.
Of course, and we'll talk more about the New York Society of Etchers. And of course, I want to just remind the listeners that today is July 3rd, tomorrow, July 4th, the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the birthday of the United States of America. And I think it's a perfect time to talk about activism in art, which is really talking about free speech in art, really, and being able to criticize one's government or the policies of one's government using art. And I saw some amazing things on your website, and I haven't seen the show yet. I really want to go see the show. But right now, where is that? It's in Peekskill, New York.
The show is called The Art of Persuasion.
The Art of Persuasion. Tell us more about it. Steve.
What has become a series of exhibitions, Paul, traveling under the banner of the Art of Persuasion, has in its most recent exhibition has just come to a close.
Yes.
This past Saturday, we took down a show that had been in Peekskill for 2.5 months, and it's now come down and it's shuttered until later on this year, when it'll go up again at the end of the year. At Westchester Community College in Valhalla, New York, but it is part of a longer series of exhibitions that will play out over the next 18 months and close here in New York City, Chicago, and San Francisco in November.
And here at the National Arts Club, which is a place a lot of people have been to, a wonderful place for arts.
And tell us how this show came to be, why you put together a show called The Art of Persuasion.
There's a short answer and a long answer to that one.
Use both. We can hear both.
Okay. The long answer is that I began in the what I would refer to as kind of the post 9/11 period of recovery here in New York and nationally, to become increasingly aware of some changes that were taking place primarily on the national political landscape that began to concerned me and get my attention. I was particularly interested in the series of legislative acts that were involved, the Patriot Act and activities of the National Security Agency and domestic spying and other things that started to break in the news a couple of years ago now. And I actually saw an exhibition that was curated by an activist artist here in New York State named Josh McPhee, that it was curated for a show in Washington, the state of Washington, and ultimately traveled here to New York City a couple of years ago. And I went and I saw this, and it was very inspiring to me. But it was kind of at a I thought, and I don't know if I can articulate this well, but I felt this was kind of a dark period politically, for me anyway, personally, and I was feeling very frustrated at the time. I didn't know what to do with a lot of what I felt was kind of negative energy that was around at the time, and involving the war, and I thought some political oppression of dissent and activism and
so constitutional rights.
Constitutional rights is a big issue for me. I'm very, very. I actually consider myself a conservative. Moderate to moderately conservative, and even conservative about some issues. And I became increasingly concerned about a number of things that I saw happening domestically and internationally with the war. And it was in an environment prior to the first news breaks about the NSA's domestic warrantless spying activities on ordinary American citizens. So that it was at the time that I first formulated the idea for the Art of Persuasion exhibition, it was politically incredibly unpopular in this country to so much as ask a question at a news conference in Washington, D.C., like, when might we expect to see the war in Iraq come to conclusion? People were, just for simply asking questions like that, being branded as un-American, anti-troop, anti-American traitorous and things. And that kind of browbeating, that sort of political environment kind of alarmed me and upset me, because I didn't know anybody that wasn't supporting the troops in this. But I knew a lot of people at the time that were beginning to feel uncomfortable that the war was taking on a direction. And
now you're an etcher yourself.
yes, I'm an artist printmaker.
Yes, and so is most of your work politically based, or was this a change in your work?
It was more of my response to the political environment wasn't a complete change, because I have kind of a lifetime interest and background in political activism. But like I think millions of other New Yorkers and Americans in the kind of the post 9/11 environment, I felt my voice somewhat muted. I felt that I had been quieted by this very sad and catastrophic event, which many of us, and probably all of us in this room right now, are still in the process of sorting out for ourselves. And I think one of the first spectacles that fell all of us, which was kind of horrific, was watching the greater sort of political, architectural, public relations scramble over the World Trade Center site, which was so, like for me personally, I won't speak for anybody else, but really kind of an appalling circus. The whole let's redesign it competition. I thought it was a folly and very embarrassing for New York. So I felt very muted at the time, and I'd been, and then when the war effort picked up, it was equally sort of frightening to me, a kind of a theatrical performance, I thought, in Washington, as we marched into a war that had already been resolved by the UN, for example, and could have been further resolved, in the UN, but we're going it alone, kind of thing.
How did you choose the artists? And we'll talk to Rosalee in a minute.
Right, how you got involved. Was it a juried show? Or?
Yeah, the Etchers Society produces 2, 3, or 4 juried or invitational shows a year since we began exhibiting in 2000. We've averaged probably 4 shows a year, many of which have had international overtones. We've exhibited with artists from Hungary, Peru, Australia, just the Ireland, just to name a few, Chinese.
So how many artists are involved in the Art of Persuasion show? Is that a large number of
Yeah, probably
exhibitors?
As many as 50 now.
Okay. And Rosalee, how did you get involved with it? Did you just
With
submit a
the
piece
group?
of work? Yeah. And with the show
I think I knew Stephen from the National Arts Clubs. That's where we met, and then because I'm doing printmaking, one thing led to another, and so he'd sent me prospectuses, which are the invitation to send a slide for jury, and And
so do you have one piece in this show? Or
in this show, I just have this one piece. Yes.
The one that's on the screen behind us right now, which you can see partially. Maybe we'll get up in a moment and let people see it. What is you can see a little bit. I mean, it looks like a flag of Texas. There's a white star. There's a red.
It's really hard to describe that intellectually, because it was an emotional experience for me. I was in a printmaking workshop in Santa Fe, and it was in January, right after 9/11, so it was January of 2002, and I started working on this. I really, and I just got into the horror of it and the destruction, and I don't know where that flag come. That red was like blood and part of our flag, and it was just like this emotional pouring out for me. And I know after I finished it, the workshop organizer came over and he said, "Are you okay?" But it was like Steve said, all of us here in New York, and there were many artists in Santa Fe at the time who had studios in the World Trade Center,
Oh, dear, yeah.
and they had been given a studio at the College of Santa Fe to use during that time. So I don't know, it was just something that I needed to do, and that's what I did.
How many artists are participating in the Art of Persuasion show?
So far, we've probably had somewhere between 50 and 60 different artists hang work in the series of exhibitions so far. It started out initially as a juried exhibition that was curated for us by Marilyn Kushner. It was then the curator of prints and photographs from the Brooklyn Museum of Art. She since moved on to the New York Historical Society. She juried the show for us, and then it was so well received, like sort of by the press and popularly, that we immediately began to get invitations from primarily from academic institutions and cultural institutions to travel the show. And the first one came from the Paramount Center for the Arts up in Peekskill. Bill Maxwell, who teaches up in Westchester County, made the introduction for us, and it was a larger venue than the original one at the National Arts Club, where we were somewhat constrained by size.
So you were able to include more people.
So we were able to include more people, and what we did was we went back to the original pool of slides. Marilyn Kushner picked a very aggressive, kind of war-oriented show, but there were many other artists who would submitted work about refugees and hunger and political oppression and things. So we were able to go back to a pool of artists that we didn't even have to go looking for work. And then, but we invited other people that had caught on, and actually Rosalee had come to the reception at the National Arts Club and saw the show that night. She was like, "Oh my goodness, I have a great piece for this show." So
I thought I didn't have a piece,
initially,
but
and so that it's grown and grown. And what's come out of it is, after the November show, one of the artists, the only artist from out of state that we had invited into a show, was a very well-known political activist and artist on the West Coast, a man named Art Hazelwood, who lives in San Francisco. When he got back to San Francisco, he sent me an email and said he'd been so inspired by what the Etchers Society had done here in New York that he wanted to do something in San Francisco to cover the 2008 election cycle. And I wrote him back instantly and said, "Would you like to form a coalition around this idea and launch a national program to attract other artists and printmaker and groups to this effort?" And he said, "Done." So we worked on it basically from December through January and February, and created a new platform for the Art of Persuasion exhibits that we now call the Art of Democracy. And we've opened a website at www.artofdemocracy.org.
Let's say that again for folks. So
www.artofdemocracy.org. And we've set up an introduction, a brief description, an introduction, how to join, what its mission is, and where it's going, and we've listed the three known collaboration exhibitions for this, one of which was initiated for us by Rosalee, who is an alumni of Luma.
No, not Luma, but Loyola University in Chicago, and they recently opened an art museum there. And they're located on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, right behind the water. What?
For Chicago Challenge,
Museum Mile.
Museum Mile,
right
Chicago.
Behind the water tower. And so I said to Steve, I'm on the board of that museum. And so I said to Steve, that would be an interesting place to put this show. So he picked it up, and he happened to be going to Chicago. He met Pam Ambrose, who's the director, and they've been back and forth, and so it's now fait accompli. We're going to do it in right before election in Chicago.
That's interesting. So has is this, I mean, for visual artists, getting involved in, this is something, I was just reading about, Picasso and Guernica and the role of artists in the 30s, opposing fascism and supporting the Spanish Civil War, and of course all the angst they were thrown into when you had the Stalin-Hitler Pact and all of that. It's a fascinating part of American history. Is this visual artists, sort of stepping out and becoming political? I mean, there's been Keith Haring, of course, and there's been a lot of things in the contemporary arts world, but this is interesting that you have people coming together.
Well, I wanted to ask a
like
question about the political perspective. Would you say that all the artists share the same political perspective, or that you're displaying a spectrum of different points of view?
A broad spectrum, actually, and that's what we set out to do. The initial exhibition, which was curated for us by Marilyn Kushner, was very focused on 9/11 and the war response to it, but the expanded version that we presented in Peekskill incorporated the other subjects that I reviewed before. But I'd like to, if I may respond to your idea, is that what I think the initial impetus behind organizing this was more of to reawaken a very, very serious American tradition of activist art. And when I was 17 years old, I got my draft card for the Vietnam War, like every other kid in my high school class. And I promptly took a bus to Washington, D.C. for my first moratorium, and got my first peace posters and armbands and buttons. But the point is,
a very artistic era.
It was a very artistic era, and what we did with the Art of Persuasion exhibition was I commissioned 4 artists, actually a total of 5 artists, to create posters for the exhibition, which was a very, very exciting program for us, and the anchor piece of which was designed for us by Will Barnett, who is now 96 years old.
An artist icon.
And a real veteran of all these struggles you've been talking about.
Better believe it.
By the way, we're live, and our number is 212-757-1538, and we'll try and take a couple of calls. Let's see what happens when we try. You're on.
Hello?
Hello.
I don't hear anybody.
I don't hear anything. Well, we give it a try. Anyway, you're on.
Hello?
No, I guess not. Sorry. Well, we'll try again later. Okay. So try again, 757-1538-212. We'll try and take your calls. Again, I can't predict if we have any technical, if we have a connection there, if it's really working, but we'll give it a shot.
Rosalee, why don't you give out your website now, too?
Yes,
since we're...
Oh, my website is www.roisaly.com.
Like
That's
name,
my...
but just Ro instead of Rosalee.
Yes.
Okay, great.
You're on.
Hello?
Caller.
Hello?
I guess
You don't
not.
have any volume.
Right. Well, they should be on. Yeah, maybe they...
I wonder what's going on.
No, I don't know. I'll give it a try. All right, let's continue talking about this whole issue of art and politics, because I know it's always been...
Well, Rosalee, for example, your work is... You have a lot of landscape-oriented things.
Yes, it's not
aesthetically
necessarily...
very beautiful. Well, I mean, I can see you're an aesthetic. You're into beauty.
Yeah.
And so what is the history in your own work of political statements? And
Nothing.
so this is
This
kind
is
of
a
a new bent
departure.
for you.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
However, I have a career, or I have had a career in a couple of places as a political activist. First in the Stuyvesant Park Neighborhood Association, which is done in my neighborhood, and I was the president of that group. And we fought Beth Israel, and we tried to get the Dvorak House landmarked, and we actually got the district landmarked. So, I do have some political bones in me.
So you're talking about Stuyvesant Town and the buildings?
No,
there?
I'm talking about Stuyvesant Park
Okay.
Neighborhood Association, which is the park on 2nd Avenue between 15th and 17th.
Around the park, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then over at the National Arts Club, I also was involved in politics over there. So.
But it's interesting that it's always been this issue of whether art leads or follows political movements. Do you see that a show like this is making a political statement that might change public policy, end the war, activate people to end the war, or is more sort of following that movement and sort of illustrating it and giving it some culture? I mean, this has always been like an issue. Is art like, some felt that some artists feel that their art is like a revolutionary act in itself. When they paint a painting, it can change the world. Others have said, no, it more reflects what's going on.
I think there are a number of answers to that question, and I would begin by saying that a number of the people that have been involved in the exhibition since its inception, like Marshall Arisman, who is a career political art activist, and Francis Jeter, who is probably Marshall's counterpart nationally for fame and achievement, have been doing this all along. But I think that Rosalee's and my entry into this is not one of, of no experience, but it's kind of a reactivation. What I found is that we've been able to harness the energy of a lot of people that are career activist artists, and like Will Barnett and Marshall and Francis and others, and Chernow, but also that we've provided a platform of expression for at least a New York audience, and which we're now extending to Chicago and San Francisco, who have been motivated by recent events to do something.
Recent events, we're talking about George Bush's insane mishandling of the war and the deaths of thousands of people, the starting of the Civil War, the phony Libby, should have gone to jail, and he's not going to jail, what's going on here? All this kind of stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, I would say yes, and then there are other issues like Defour, one of our artists, exhibiting artists, exhibited some pieces about children, refugees, and then there have been a number of statements about torture, for example, and the violation of other human rights, as well as, in my particular case, I consider myself a constitutionalist. I'm particularly concerned with rights of privacy, due process, habeas corpus,
Tell us a
and
little
free
bit
speech.
about your piece.
I used an etching of mine. I do etchings of 3 different groups, sort of pure graphic design pieces that you could consider abstract in some cases. I do a lot of wildlife subjects in soft ground, and then I do another percentage, a substantial percentage of my work is of New York City iconography, and I happen to have used a very large format etching that I did of the Statue of Liberty as the matrix for a silk screen that an artist friend of mine created that can be read, oddly enough, from 2 different perspectives. The title of the piece is called Vote, and it says under the word vote, which is in large, bold, red type, it says under that, like your life depends on it, and then in smaller type it says because it does, and then running along the bottom it says when they come for you, if you don't, when they come for you, you wish you had. Because I wanted to combine a number of elements of what I see going on with the government crossing over a little too many lines to keep me comfortable right now in terms of our privacy and personal security here. So I've built on iconography of mine and politicized it, and I'm going on with that right now. I like the Statue of Liberty as an icon, and I think that at least one of the interesting reactions I've had to my own work is that it would fly as well in Bible Belt, Texas, as vote, like your life depends on it, because it does. It would mean the same thing to those people down there as it does to me, who feels kind of constitutionally threatened right now. And as a lot of stuff that I think other artists like Marshall Arisman and Francis Jeter have the same type of experience. People interpret work.
Right. Well, in a sense, producing art is an absolute exercise in freedom of speech. I mean, whether it's political or not, you're up there using the full rights to express yourself as guaranteed under the Constitution. And do you feel like you've come under any pressure? Has there been criticism of what you're doing? Have there been counter protests? Anything? Have you gotten letters saying
No.
this is, you're not supporting the troops by doing this? What's going on?
None whatsoever.
So
In
you've been
fact,
very well received.
yeah,
It's been well
unbelievable. But the environment in which the exhibition was presented was very, very, very different from the environment in which it was conceived. I went to my family, my mentors, my wife. I even spoke to an attorney because I wasn't sure in the age of national security letters that we live in today that what my rights were legally to do this type of thing, and I was assured that I could go forward, but not without some hesitation. By the time between the time it was
Why the
conceived,
hesitation?
lots of different reasons, most of them personal and long answers. But I have a family and a young child, and I'm just
I'm worried about the thing I just brought up, that there might be criticism, you might get angry, counter protests.
Less that than difficult to articulate right now because it's so far in the past, Paul. If you'd asked me then, I could answer it more easily what was eating me at the time. But by the time the exhibition opened on top of the 2006 election results. Mm-hmm. It opened on that Monday. The next night, there was a complete regime change in Washington, D.C., and 700 people showed up at the reception like in celebration. It was the biggest reception we ever, and you were there.
Yeah, I was there.
The
It was
biggest
packed,
reception we ever had at the National Arts Club. At midnight, 11:45, the exhibition was supposed to end at 8. At 11:45, they were throwing out the remaining.
I knew there was a big story here, in our, so that's the big story, right
Yeah,
there.
it was, and nothing. And then, of course, we've had a lot of interest in picking up the exhibition. We've actually had to turn down.
And you kind of coordinate the end of all of this with the 2008 election.
Well, yeah, that's what came. The Art of Democracy idea that was initiated at first by Art Hazelwood's, a message to me that he wanted to do the same thing to that. I immediately fired back and said, "Can we do it together?
Yeah.
Let's do it together." And then Rosalee's introduction to Loyola University's Museum of Art in Chicago, and now we've opened it up to all of North America. But we're already talking to people in Australia about
Why
doing
don't we
something
give
in
out
Europe.
the websites one more time, real quickly?
Give our contact information.
Should I go first?
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
The website for the Art of Democracy exhibition is www.artofdemocracy.org. Art of Democracy is one word. And it can also be found linked to the New York Society of Etchers website, which is easy to Google up.
I'm sure Loyola has, that the LUMA has, the Loyola University Museum of Art has its website also.
Thank you both so much for coming.
Rosalee,
Really
thank you.
appreciate
welcome.
it. It was a
Rosalee
great
Isley
show.
and Stephen Fredericks, thank you very much for
Thanks very
joining
much.
us and for the good work that you're doing and getting artists all motivated and excited about this. Very good.
Right.